Tyler Dunn had never imagined he'd find solace in routine, but there was something strangely grounding about the way fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the auto doors at Walmart gave that soft whoosh when people passed through. He liked the predictability, the slow rhythm of the night shift. Everything had its place. The aisles were quiet, the shelves were familiar, and the pressure was manageable. For someone like Tyler, 17 years old and working his first job, that predictability was more than a convenience, it was a necessity. Born with a mild neuromuscular disorder that affected his gait, coordination, and occasionally his facial expressions, Tyler wasn't the kind of person who thrived on improvisation or fast-paced interaction. But he wasn't fragile either. He moved differently. He processed things at his own speed. And he had learned to carry himself with quiet determination in a world that often confused speed with competence. He didn't talk much, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because he knew how easily words could turn into misunderstandings. At school, he had been misjudged more than once. Some thought he was arrogant. Others assumed he had attitude problems, and a few just chose to ignore him altogether. But those assumptions rarely lasted once people got to know him. At Walmart, it was no different. His manager, Jason Whitmore, had seen a lot of high school kids come through the doors, most of them bored or distracted, watching the clock. But Tyler was different. He paid attention. He followed instructions with care. He didn't complain. And more importantly, he wanted to do the job right. That alone earned him the kind of quiet respect that people didn't often articulate but carried in their gestures, a nod here, a pat on the shoulder there. Jason had taken a liking to him early on, not out of pity but out of recognition. The kid had resolve, and resolve was rare. Tyler's evenings started the same way every night. He'd arrive an hour before his shift, dressed in uniform, hair combed, lanyard clipped on straight. He liked arriving early, it gave him time to adjust. Sometimes he'd sit in the break room and quietly sip water while reading instructions for new stocking protocols, or he'd go over the layout of upcoming sales displays. It calmed him, helped him settle into the rhythm. Then, when 8 p.m. rolled around, he'd clock in and head to whatever section needed attention that night. Usually it was general merchandise or garden supplies, occasionally housewares if shipments had arrived early. He liked the garden section best. It smelled faintly of mulch and fertilizer, and it was usually quiet by evening. A lot of customers avoided it after dark. He worked alone most nights, and that suited him fine. He wasn't antisocial, but he found large crowds exhausting, and interacting with strangers often made him feel like he was being watched or tested. Working evenings gave him just enough solitude to be effective without being overwhelmed. And the job itself was straightforward: scan, sort, shelve, repeat. He moved slowly, deliberately, often double-checking labels and making sure items were aligned correctly. He never rushed, not even when others did. That had initially drawn a few odd glances from coworkers, but over time they realized Tyler's sections were always the most organized. Customers never had trouble finding what they needed there. And unlike others, Tyler never left a task half-finished. He'd been working there just over 3 months when he first noticed them. A middle-aged couple, well-dressed, put together in a slightly artificial way, like people who cared very much about appearances. The woman was tall, with a sharp jawline and a curtain of blonde hair set perfectly in place. Her name, he would later learn, was Karen Foster. Her husband, Marvin, had a similar kind of stiffness to him, like he measured his steps with intent. They didn't shop much, they just lingered. The first time they passed through his aisle in garden supplies, paused without a word and stared. Tyler didn't register it as threatening at first. People often stared at him when he moved, especially if they weren't expecting his kind of gait. But there was something different about the way they did it. Not curiosity, not confusion. Something else. Judgment, maybe. Or disappointment. He couldn't tell for sure. They returned again 2 nights later. Same section, same lingering pause. No purchase in hand, no questions asked. Just a long look, and then they moved on. Tyler didn't react. He didn't report it. It wasn't against the rules to stare. Still, he started keeping mental notes. The times they arrived, where they walked, what they said. Not much, it turned out. They barely spoke to anyone. The staff didn't seem to notice them. And by the time his shift ended, they were usually gone. Tyler didn't mention it to Jason. He didn't want to sound paranoid. But part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something about the couple didn't sit right. The way Marvin looked around the aisle before turning his eyes toward Tyler. The way Karen's expression never changed, not even when they passed other customers. It was like they were watching a performance and waiting for the actor to mess up. That week, Tyler found himself double-checking his steps more than usual. Making sure his shirt was tucked, his badge was visible, his hands steady. He wasn't afraid, just unsettled. Outside of work, his life was small but functional. He lived with his older sister Dana, who worked as a night pharmacist a few blocks away. She had taken care of him since their mother's passing 5 years ago. Dana was practical, driven, and fiercely protective. She didn't hover, she respected his independence, but she checked in every night, made sure he got home safe, made sure he wasn't bottling too much up. Their relationship was the kind that didn't need a lot of words. She cooked, he cleaned, she drove. He paid half the rent from his paycheck. It worked. Tyler didn't have many friends, a few acquaintances from high school, mostly quiet types like him. He wasn't part of any clubs, didn't play sports. But he didn't feel isolated. His world was quiet by design. Predictable, manageable, he liked it that way. Still, as the days passed, the Fosters continued to reappear, and Tyler began to feel that quietness shift. One evening, while restocking fertilizer bags, he noticed Marvin standing behind him, arms crossed. Tyler turned, startled. "Need help with something, sir?" he asked calmly. Marvin didn't respond, just stared. Then, after a moment, turned and walked away. Tyler stood still for a long second before returning to his task. Later that night, he found a card abandoned in his aisle with a single handwritten note left on the handle. "Some people don't belong out here after dark." It wasn't signed. It wasn't in anyone's handwriting, he recognized. And while it didn't name him, there was no mistaking who it was meant for. Tyler took a photo of the note with his phone, just in case. He didn't say anything to anyone, not yet. But that night, he left the store through the back exit instead of the front. Dana picked him up like always, and he said nothing during the ride. She didn't press. She knew how he worked. If it was serious, he'd talk. Tyler didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about the way Karen's eyes had scanned him earlier. Not like someone looking at a cashier. It's like someone measuring a threat. He wasn't a confrontational person. He didn't seek out trouble. But this didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt like a test, and he didn't know yet what would happen if he failed. The next morning, Jason called him into the office before his shift. There had been a complaint, he said. A customer had alleged that Tyler had ignored her when she asked for assistance. Jason didn't sound angry, just puzzled. She didn't give a name, he said, but she was specific. Said you looked at her and then walked away. Tyler blinked. That didn't happen, he replied, voice steady. Jason nodded. I figured. Your section's clean. No issues on cameras. Just wanted to let you know it came in. Then he added something that stuck in Tyler's head long after the conversation ended. Some people you just can't win with. Don't let it shake you. Just keep doing your job. Tyler thanked him and walked out, but something inside him felt different. It wasn't fear. It was preparation. Something told him this wasn't the end. And for the first time, Tyler began to suspect that the Fosters weren't just difficult customers. They were watching, waiting, and whatever they thought they saw in him, it wasn't going away. 2 nights after the complaint, Tyler returned to work slightly more alert than usual. Something about the exchange with Jason hadn't left him. Though Jason had dismissed the complaint as likely baseless, Tyler understood too well how easily small things could snowball into big consequences, especially when you were different. He didn't like drawing attention, especially not from the kind of people who made complaints with vague language and no intention of explaining themselves. But what unnerved him more than the complaint itself was the lingering sense that it had been planned, not just a knee-jerk reaction from a frustrated shopper, but something targeted, something deliberate. The note from the cart handle still sat in a folder on his phone, buried in his photo archive like a bruise he wasn't ready to touch. He was assigned to the seasonal aisle that night, Halloween stock, mostly plastics, inflatables, and bulk candy bags. It was one of the more chaotic areas of the store, cluttered with displays that were already being picked apart by early shoppers and curious kids. Still, Tyler worked efficiently, his scanner gun rhythmically beeping as he logged inventory and shifted boxes onto the lower shelves. Around 9:30, while kneeling to restock a bottom bin of pumpkin lanterns, he sensed movement at the end of the aisle. He looked up just in time to see Karen Foster turn the corner, her purse neatly slung over her shoulder, eyes already locked on him. Behind her, Marvin pushed an empty cart, gliding slowly, eyes scanning the shelves with the lazy interest of someone who wasn't actually looking for anything. Tyler turned his attention back to his work, keeping his posture calm, his hands steady. He didn't want to overreact. There were cameras. He was in the middle of a well-lit, open aisle. It was a public space, and they weren't breaking any rules. He repeated those facts in his head like a silent mantra. He had every right to be there. So did they. That didn't mean he had to engage. But Karen had other plans. As she approached, her voice rang out loud enough to draw the attention of a woman 2 aisles over. "Excuse me. Hello? Are you going to pretend not to hear me again?" Tyler stood up slowly, careful not to look startled. He looked at her face expression hard and unreadable, and then at Marvin, who stood silently, gripping the handle of the cart as if bracing for something. "I'm working in this section," Tyler said evenly. "If you need help, I can call someone from customer service to assist you." Karen laughed, not a friendly laugh, but sharp, cold, derisive. "You don't even make eye contact. You think that's acceptable? I've been trying to get your attention for over 2 minutes. Tyler's fingers tightened around the scanner. "You just turned the corner," he replied, voice flat. "Don't get smart with me," she snapped, stepping forward. "You people never take responsibility. You think it's fine to ignore customers just because you're standing here with a uniform and a name tag?" Her voice was rising now, starting to echo into nearby aisles. "My husband asked you something last week and you just turned your back on him. And now you're doing it again." Marvin didn't speak, but his eyes were trained on Tyler with a strange, almost dispassionate gaze, like someone watching a film he'd seen before. Tyler stood his ground but made no move forward, no attempt to argue. His instincts told him there was no winning in that moment, no explanation that would satisfy her, no apology that would diffuse the energy she was building. He felt the heat creeping up his neck, not from shame, but from the recognition that she wasn't just angry. She was escalating. Another employee, a younger girl named Serena from the toy section, poked her head around the aisle with a confused expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. Karen turned toward her immediately. "This boy has been ignoring me, twice. I've tried to be patient, but clearly he's not suited to interact with customers. I don't know what kind of people you hire here, but this is unacceptable." Tyler looked at Serena. She looked uncertain but nodded slightly. "I can get a manager," she said, and disappeared around the corner. Tyler exhaled slowly and took a step back from Karen, creating more space between them. She watched him like a hawk, as if waiting for a reaction, something visible that she could pounce on. Marvin remained silent. Jason arrived 3 minutes later, clipboard in hand, brow furrowed. I understand there's a concern." Karen was all sweetness now, smiling thinly. "This employee has ignored me on multiple occasions. I asked for help, and he refused. I think he's got some sort of attitude problem or doesn't understand how to talk to people." Either way, I don't feel safe shopping in a store where staff are allowed to behave like this. Tyler didn't respond. He didn't need to. Jason had already seen enough. Tyler is one of our most consistent employees. He doesn't work in customer-facing roles for a reason. If you needed help, there are staff at the service desk and in every other department. Karen's expression soured. So you're defending him? I'm saying I know his work, and I know when someone's making a scene. The way Karen's mouth tightened told Tyler she wasn't used to being challenged. Well, we'll be filing a complaint, she said curtly, turning on her heel. Marvin followed without a word, their cart still empty. Tyler stood quietly while Jason scribbled a note on his clipboard. You handled that right, he said, not looking up. You didn't engage. That was smart. Go ahead and take your break early. Tyler nodded and walked toward the back, but something in his chest stayed tight. It wasn't fear. It was frustration. The woman had lied outright, tried to bait him in front of others, and almost succeeded in creating the impression that he was unprofessional or dangerous. And Marvin never said a word. That bothered Tyler more than the yelling, the silence, the way he simply watched. Like he didn't need to speak because he already knew how it would play out. When Tyler stepped out to the break area, he checked his phone. No new messages. Dana wouldn't be out for another hour. He considered texting her but decided against it. Instead, he sat quietly in the employee lounge, letting his mind circle the memory. Karen's tone, her calculated use of volume, the subtle pivot into a false sense of victimhood. It wasn't just a tantrum. She had practiced that kind of confrontation. She knew how to control a narrative. And if she was willing to do it in a store full of cameras and witnesses, Tyler wondered what she'd do where no one was watching. Later that night, he clocked out and left through the rear employee exit. Dana was waiting in the car, reading something on her phone. As he opened the passenger door, he paused. Across the dark parking lot, in the furthest row near the fence, he saw the faint outline of a vehicle that looked familiar, a silver Chrysler with a distinct crack across the rear brake light. The same one he'd seen Karen and Marvin drive away in earlier that night. It hadn't left. He slid into the seat and closed the door slowly. Everything okay? Dana asked, glancing up. Tyler hesitated. Yeah, just tired. They pulled out of the lot. As they turned onto the main road, he looked over his shoulder. The Chrysler hadn't moved, but its lights flickered on. Then it drove away in the opposite direction. Tyler said nothing, but he felt it now, clear as the night air outside the window. This wasn't just about a rude customer anymore. This was personal. And it was only beginning. The following week unfolded with a strange, dissonant rhythm that Tyler couldn't ignore. On the surface, everything at Walmart remained exactly as it had always been, the same overhead announcements about rollback savings, the same dull gleam of polished linoleum floors, the same nightly shuffling of carts, boxes, and late shoppers. But something underneath that surface had shifted. It wasn't visible, not in the way accidents or confrontations are, but it was there, humming just beneath the familiarity. The lights still flickered overhead, but now Tyler noticed them more. The shelves still stood in ordered rows, but now he checked behind them more often than before. And while his hands worked with their usual steady precision, his mind wandered into darker territory. Jason had kept his word and made sure Tyler's shifts stayed in the back half of the store stocking, inventory prep, light pallet work. The excuse was valid. Tyler worked better in environments that didn't require immediate customer engagement. But it was more than that now. Jason had seen something in Karen that bothered him. He never said it aloud, never made it official, but Tyler knew. There was something in the way Jason lingered in Tyler's aisle longer than usual, or how he paused near exits after 10 p.m., like he was watching for something. It gave Tyler a small sense of protection, but it also confirmed what he feared. People were starting to notice that something was wrong. That meant it wasn't in his head. That meant this wasn't just discomfort. It was danger, even if no one wanted to call it that yet. 3 days after the confrontation in the Halloween aisle, Tyler found his car scratched. Not dramatically, not even enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to leave a jagged line across the back driver's side door. It hadn't been there the night before. He parked in the employee section near the loading dock, a spot partially obscured by the trash compactor unit and barely within view of the main security camera sweep. The scratch wasn't keyed, more like something sharp had been drawn across the paint on purpose, calculated, quiet. He didn't panic. Instead, he did what he had learned to do. He documented. He took photos from 3 angles, noted the time, location, and lighting, and forwarded them to Jason in an email with a short message, just in case this becomes something. Jason replied within 15 minutes. "Got it. I'll pass it to security. Let me know if anything else happens." Tyler appreciated the shortness of the reply. It didn't overreact. It didn't downplay. It just acknowledged. That kind of steady support was rare, and he didn't take it for granted. Still, the message made it clear that unless someone was seen on camera, there wasn't much anyone could do. It wasn't illegal to park nearby. It wasn't proof. It was just suspicion, and suspicion, Tyler knew, had a way of making people look paranoid if voiced too loudly. That night, while shelving new garden lighting kits, he caught the faint sound of whispering near the end of the aisle. He looked up, expecting another late shopper or maybe Serena from Toys, but instead saw Marvin again. This time he wasn't with Karen. He stood alone, leaning slightly against the corner of the aisle divider, watching Tyler. No cart. No product in hand, just watching. Tyler didn't speak. He had no reason to. Instead, he straightened his posture and returned to his task, back turned deliberately but ears open. Marvin didn't move for a solid 30 seconds. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, footsteps soft against the floor. The silence he left behind was louder than any threat. Later, during his break, Tyler checked the lot through the small window in the break room door. The Chrysler was there again, parked farther away this time, as if hiding in plain sight. He resisted the urge to report it again. Without license plate evidence or interaction, it was still just a coincidence. Just like the scratch. Just like the note. Just like the staring. The next day, it escalated further. When Tyler arrived at his locker before his shift, he found it slightly ajar. That was unusual. He always locked it, double-checked it. Inside, nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. Except for a folded slip of paper wedged into the corner between the upper shelf and the back panel. He unfolded it slowly. One sentence, scrawled in neat, tight handwriting. Not everyone forgets that face. His stomach dropped, not from fear, but from cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't random. It wasn't noise. Someone, Marvin or Karen, maybe both, was making sure he knew they were watching, that they weren't finished, and that this wasn't about Walmart or service complaints. This was personal, though the reasons remained locked behind whatever twisted narrative they had invented in their heads. Tyler didn't wait this time. He walked directly to the security desk, requested to speak with Mike, the overnight supervisor, and handed over the note. He explained it clearly, calmly, with no embellishment. Mike took it seriously. He logged it, made a copy, and informed Tyler that footage near the lockers would be reviewed. Jason was looped in that same night. Still, the response, though well-intentioned, followed protocol. "We'll keep eyes open. If you feel unsafe, call from your phone or the panic button behind each aisle." It wasn't empty. It was just limited. Tyler understood that. Places like Walmart weren't built to handle personalized harassment unless it crossed a visible legal threshold. What unnerved him most wasn't the lack of immediate consequences. It was the realization that whoever had done this had access to employee areas customers weren't supposed to enter without clearance. That meant either Karen or Marvin had found a way past the system, or someone had helped them intentionally or not. Either scenario made Tyler uneasy in a way that ordinary threats never could. If they could reach his locker, what else could they reach? By the end of that week, his routine was unraveling. Dana noticed first. He was quieter than usual during their rides home, eyes flicking to mirrors more often than before. He checked the locks at home twice now, sometimes 3 times. He claimed he was just tired. That Halloween stock was brutal this year, but she knew better. One night after he closed the car door a little too hard, she said it aloud. "You think they're following you?" He didn't answer right away. Eventually he nodded. "Tell me everything," she said. He did, slowly, piece by piece, letting it unfold without drama. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she asked only one question. "What's Jason doing?" "Watching. Logging it. He's good. But they haven't done anything illegal. Not officially." Dana's jaw clenched. "You let me know if that changes." Tyler nodded. They didn't talk about it again, but the next day she made sure he had a new flashlight in his bag and a spare phone charger in his locker. Quiet reinforcement. Not overbearing. Just readiness. Still, the Fosters weren't finished. The next escalation came not with a note or a scratch, but with a lie. Jason called Tyler into the back office at the start of his shift, tone unreadable. "We got another complaint. This one's formal. A claim that you made threatening gestures. That you stepped toward a customer aggressively. It's filed. HR has to review it." Tyler felt the air leave his lungs. That never happened. "I know," Jason said, holding up a hand. "I already pulled the camera. You didn't even move. You were restocking canned goods. They stood 6 feet away and fabricated the whole thing. But it's on record. We're submitting the footage with our response. Just wanted to warn you, if they try again, we're going to restrict their entry." Tyler nodded, but the damage was done. The complaint itself, no matter how false, created a footprint. It became a line in a file, a phrase in a system, threatening behavior. That kind of language could stick, even if disproven. That night, as he closed up his section, he found the last sign of the evening, a single garden gnome from a clearance display placed carefully atop his cart. It wasn't from his aisle. It didn't belong. But the way it faced him, eyes wide, smile carved too deep, felt like a message. Tyler left it there. He walked out through the back. And in the distance, under the far edge of the parking lot lights, he saw the Chrysler again, waiting. It was Thursday evening when the atmosphere inside the store shifted from routine discomfort to something Tyler could only describe as suffocating. The air felt thicker that night, as though it carried with it the residue of everything unspoken that had accumulated over the last 2 weeks. He had been sleeping less, eating out of rhythm, and checking corners in every room like his instincts no longer trusted light alone to make a place feel safe. Even his posture had changed, less fluid, more braced. Every task was done with a heightened awareness of where his body was, how exposed his back might be, who was nearby. And although his coworkers still greeted him the same way, still asked him how his night was going or offered extra time on break if he looked worn out, there was a growing divide between their normality and his quiet reality. Tyler had been moved to the hardware aisle, temporarily overflow from a late shipment of power tools that needed tagging and sorting before the weekend rush. He liked the section. The materials were solid, heavy, not the kind of fragile stock that could be tossed around or miscounted easily. The shelves were taller than average, blocking views from adjacent aisles, and for a brief while he felt tucked away, folded into the store like a page you didn't want anyone to dog-ear. But that sense of security vanished by 10 p.m. The store was quiet that hour. Few customers wandered that far from the front, and most apartments had gone still as employees began prepping for restock. Tyler was checking drill attachments when he heard the cart wheels, 2 of them. They didn't squeak or rattle like the older ones. These were smooth, freshly oiled, but still made that low dragging sound over tile. He turned his head slowly, just enough to see the edge of Karen's beige jacket glide past the aisle entrance. Marvin followed, hands behind his back, walking not with urgency but with intention. Tyler froze where he stood. They hadn't spoken to him since the last formal complaint, but their presence in the hardware section felt wrong, too far from the seasonal deals, too specific in its timing. He lowered himself beside the shelving rack, pretending to check product labels while keeping his line of sight through the narrow bottom gap between shelves. Their shoes stopped 10 feet away, just out of view. He could hear Karen speaking, low and clipped. "He's right there. You see how he hides? Coward." Tyler stayed still. Marvin's voice followed, quieter but clear. "He's not the one. I'm telling you. It's not the same." Karen snapped back. "It doesn't matter. Look at how he walks. Look at his face. Same dead expression." There was a pause long enough for Tyler to feel his heartbeat climb like it was trying to reach his throat. "I want him to feel it," Karen said, with an edge Tyler hadn't heard before. "They never feel it until you make them." He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Then, abruptly, their footsteps faded. The wheels rolled off, slow and deliberate, the way a person walks when they want to be seen walking away. He stayed hidden for a minute longer before standing up. His fingers were shaking. Not violently, but enough to make re-tagging drill bits impossible. He left the cart where it was, crossed the store, and stepped into the employees' only hallway near the manager's office. The cameras there were active. It felt safer. The space wasn't particularly secure. It was just a hallway with a break room on one side and a janitor's closet on the other, but something about the overhead light and the hum of the soda machine made it easier to think. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Jason, knowing he was off that night but still wanting the moment on record. "They followed me into hardware." Said some things. I didn't engage, just documenting it. He expected to wait until morning for a response, but Jason replied within minutes. "Understood. If they return, page Mike. Stay out of reach. Cameras are on, we'll handle it." It was the first time someone had written the word "we." Until now, Tyler had carried every step of this alone, even when people listened, even when they believed him. But now the threat had moved from ambiguous discomfort into direct verbal targeting, and Jason's reply made it clear. This was no longer Tyler's burden to navigate by himself. Still, the night wasn't over. At 11:15, after most customers had left, and only a few late browsers remained, Tyler stepped out for his break. Normally he stayed in the break room. But this time the air felt too recycled, and the silence too tight, so he walked through the rear corridor and out onto the loading dock to stand by the employee vending machines. It was technically outside but fenced in and well lit. It wasn't used by customers, which made it the safest place in the building in his eyes. He leaned against the railing, sipping from a bottle of water, staring out toward the chain-link fence that separated the loading dock from the outer perimeter. Beyond it, the far end of the lot disappeared into darkness, the kind that always seemed to hum with potential. And then he saw the unmistakable blink of a cigarette ember glowing from the shadows beyond the fence. Not moving, just there, watching. His eyes adjusted slowly, and though the person was mostly hidden, the posture was unmistakable. Tall. Male. The faint outline of Marvin's coat visible under the lot's edge lighting. Tyler didn't panic. He didn't run. He pulled out his phone, took a photo, time-stamped it, and returned inside without hesitation. He walked straight to the security desk. Mike listened. He didn't downplay, didn't try to make excuses. He stepped out, reviewed the camera feed, confirmed the sighting. "He's not on store property," Mike said, "but I'll call it in." Enough's enough. The words sat heavy but reassuring. 10 minutes later, local patrol was circling the area. No confrontation. No arrests. Just presence. It was enough. When Tyler returned to the floor, Serena approached him quietly. "Heard about earlier," she said. "You good?" Tyler nodded, but she tilted her head. "They're obsessed, man. I saw them watching you. Nobody deserves that." He didn't answer, but her words lingered. It wasn't about confusion anymore. It wasn't about someone overreacting to a misunderstood gesture or expecting too much from an employee with different ways of communicating. They had chosen him. And now the question wasn't whether it would happen again. It was when, and how far they'd go next time. A week had passed since the last confrontation, and on the surface it seemed as though the tension had finally begun to dissipate. Karen and Marvin Foster had vanished from the store's regular foot traffic. Their car hadn't reappeared in the parking lot. And none of the employees had reported any sightings or suspicious behavior during their shifts. Security logs showed nothing. No new complaints had come in. For the first time in weeks, Tyler's nightly routine began to resemble what it once had been: monotonous, quiet, methodical. But that sense of normalcy, instead of offering relief, made him feel increasingly on edge. There was something deeply unsettling about the silence that followed aggression. It didn't feel like resolution. It felt like a pause, a strategic lull, the kind of calm that didn't signal peace, but preparation. Tyler knew better than to let his guard down. The absence of a visible threat didn't erase the memory of how deliberate the previous incidents had been: the locker note, the lies, the manipulative escalation. He continued to follow protocol, kept himself within the sight lines of cameras during solo tasks, and avoided isolated corners of the store after closing. Dana had noticed the change in him even before he put it into words. He had become less talkative, more alert in public, more aware of the people around him. She didn't ask questions he didn't offer answers to, but she started arriving early to pick him up, and always parked where the cameras could see her car. It was on a Tuesday evening that the next stage of escalation quietly crept in, not with a confrontation, but with a form. Tyler found it in his locker, stapled to a basic internal envelope. At first glance, it looked like routine documentation, the sort of paperwork that came through every few weeks after policy updates or district reminders. But when he checked the header, he noticed the signature didn't belong to Jason. Instead, it was stamped with the name of a regional compliance officer. That alone made the back of his neck stiffen. It meant someone from outside the store, someone in corporate, was now involved. He brought the form directly to Jason, who took one look inside before Tyler even said a word. "They filed a formal complaint to corporate," Jason said, not even attempting to soften the truth. "It's absurd. They're accusing you of repeated intimidation, calling it a pattern of hostile behavior. Completely unsubstantiated, but it forces a procedural review. We've submitted the footage from the nights in question and statements from staff. You're not in trouble. Not from us, but this is the kind of thing that builds a paper trail, and they know that." Tyler didn't say anything at first. He sat down across from Jason and let the weight of it settle in. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't touched anyone. He hadn't even responded when provoked, not once. Yet here he was, staring at corporate language crafted to frame him as a liability. "Is this going to follow me?" he asked eventually, "even if nothing comes of it?" Jason nodded slowly. "It might. For now, we're pushing to escalate this in the opposite direction. Security has enough evidence to justify filing for a store-wide no trespass order against the Fosters. Legal's involved. It's moving, just slowly." That night, Tyler was assigned to restock aisle 14 cleaning products and solvents. Around 10, as he organized a shelf of bleach bottles, he noticed one already open. A small puddle had formed under it. The cap, which should have been sealed, was resting next to the bottle instead of attached. Instinctively, he looked around the aisle, and there she was, Karen, standing 10 feet away at the end of the row, holding a pair of household gloves she hadn't even looked at. Her eyes were fixed on him, unblinking. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Just stared with that eerie calm that had become her signature. Tyler didn't respond. He turned, walked away, and reported the spill to Jason, who called in the camera logs again. This time there was no ambiguity. Marvin had placed the open bleach bottle on the shelf earlier that evening, gently unscrewing the cap before walking away, all captured clearly on the security feed. The next day, things shifted again, this time with cold precision. Tyler was called into the back office not by Jason but by Mike from security, who stood flanked by two staff witnesses and a man wearing a windbreaker with a district compliance badge clipped to his collar. "We had another incident," Mike said. "It's already been reviewed. You're not in the wrong. But we need to file your statement." The clipboard the man held showed a printed frame from surveillance footage. Marvin, caught mid-motion, reaching toward Tyler's shoulder strap in the household aisle. Tyler, in the background, oblivious to the touch, continuing his work. The accompanying complaint, submitted by Karen, claimed Tyler had shoved her husband and called her a derogatory name. But there was no audio to support it, only silence and video showing that Tyler never even turned around. "This is deliberate provocation," the investigator said flatly. "They're trying to trigger a response on camera. You didn't give them one." "That's good. But it's also why we're moving forward with the legal restriction." Jason added, "This isn't about a customer complaint anymore. This is coordinated harassment. We've got the full report prepared. Police will be involved before the week is out." But the week wasn't over. Friday arrived, dragging an eerie quiet across the store like a weighted sheet. Tyler's shift ran longer than expected due to inventory delays. He clocked out after midnight and stepped into the back hallway to meet Dana, who texted that she was parked near the garden center. He exited through the rear employee door, his bag slung over his shoulder, mind half on the weekend ahead, when he heard footsteps coming from the lot. Not hurried, not scattered, purposeful. "You think ignoring people makes you safe?" The voice hit him like a gust of cold air. Karen's tone, level and direct, carried through the stillness like she had practiced the line 100 times. "You think silence means we forget?" Tyler froze. They were standing at the edge of the sidewalk, just past the glow of the parking lot lights. Marvin stood beside her, holding something that looked like a shopping bag but wasn't filled. They weren't there to shop. They hadn't been inside the store. They were waiting. Karen stepped closer. "We asked for help. You walked away." Again. Marvin's voice followed, low and colorless. "You people always run." Tyler took a slow step back, measuring the distance to the entrance. Before he could pivot, Marvin lunged not violently, but fast enough to grab Tyler's arm and yank it just slightly, enough to disorient him, to tilt his balance. It was an ambush disguised as a plea. The force wasn't strong, but it was calculated. They didn't want to hurt him. They wanted him to retaliate. But Tyler didn't react the way they wanted. He didn't shove back. He didn't shout. He didn't do anything that could be twisted on footage. He jerked free and turned toward the building, walking at a controlled, deliberate pace back toward the door. By the time he crossed the threshold, Mike was already waiting inside. He had seen everything from the security feed. Police were called. The response was immediate and formal. Karen and Marvin didn't resist. They stuck to their narrative. They were trying to speak, trying to resolve a misunderstanding. But the cameras captured it all in the approach. The reach. The contact. That night, the police issued a formal trespass order. Karen and Marvin Foster were banned from the premises, effective immediately, with warnings filed at other local stores in the region. Their behavior was categorized as stalking with intent to provoke, and the case was open for further review under local harassment statutes. Tyler didn't speak much after it was over. He sat in the break room, not celebrating, not smiling, just breathing. Jason sat beside him for a few minutes in silence before saying, "You did everything right. All the way through." Tyler nodded, his fingers still curled slightly as if his muscles hadn't let go of the moment yet. It hadn't ended with a dramatic confrontation. It hadn't escalated into violence. But it had crossed a line one they couldn't uncross. They had chosen him because they thought he'd be easy to manipulate, because he was quiet, because he didn't respond. But silence wasn't weakness, and restraint wasn't surrender. The weekend passed with a strange stillness, the kind that made even the most mundane noises feel too sharp, too loud, like everything had been turned up one notch past normal. Tyler didn't sleep much, not because he was afraid, but because his brain wouldn't slow down long enough to let go. He kept replaying Friday night's incident in his head, not the grab or the voices, not even the sound of Karen's heels approaching from the shadows, but the exact moment when Marvin reached out and tried to make contact. It hadn't been aggressive, not in the sense that most people would recognize it, but it had been exact, almost rehearsed. There was something in the way he timed it, how he waited until the cameras could catch the moment, but not the context. Tyler knew beyond doubt now that what they were doing was not emotional. It was procedural. They were executing something with intent. Whether it was based on delusion or a personal grudge, he no longer believed it was random. Monday morning, Jason sent him a message. Compliance wants to meet. I'll be with you. 4:30, conference room. Be there early. Tyler stared at the screen for a moment, then nodded to himself. He'd been waiting for this, not the meeting itself, but the confrontation that would eventually follow, the moment where everything would have to be said out loud, in front of people who hadn't seen the build-up firsthand. Corporate didn't operate on feelings. They operated on optics, and even when you were in the right, if you didn't know how to speak their language, you could lose the narrative in 5 seconds flat. He spent the rest of the day in a state of steady tension, not fear exactly, but hyper-awareness, like standing in a doorway while wind beat against it from the outside, knowing it wouldn't break, but still flinching with every gust. The conference room was plain gray walls, standard table, notepads lined up perfectly in front of each seat. Jason was already inside when Tyler arrived, wearing his manager's vest but no name tag, which meant he'd been pulled from floor duties entirely for the meeting. Across the table sat a woman in her 50s with a laptop already open, fingers poised on the keyboard. Her badge read K. Middleton, District Oversight. Her eyes, though calm, moved quickly, cataloging Tyler with the precision of someone used to reading body language as data. She didn't shake hands. She didn't smile. "Mr. Dunn," she said. "Please sit." What followed wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either. She asked about the timeline, the behavior in the notes, the accusations. She asked what he felt during each encounter, how he reacted, whether he'd ever raised his voice. She asked about his medical background, not explicitly, but in subtle, coded phrases that danced around disability law without touching it directly. Jason cut in twice to clarify policy. Each time she nodded, typed, and moved on. She showed him footage, not from the night of the grab, but from a week prior when Marvin had followed him to the cleaning aisle. "At any point, did you feel physically threatened in this instance?" she asked. "Yes," Tyler said. No hesitation. Why? Because they didn't want anything from the store. They were there for me. That's not shopping. That's hunting. That made her pause just for a second. Her fingers stopped typing. She looked at Jason, then back at Tyler, then typed again. The meeting ended with no conclusion. No apology. No assurance. Just documentation. But as Tyler left the room, Jason followed, and in the hallway said quietly she saw it. She's not going to say it, but she knows. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't resolution. But it was something. A crack in the corporate mask. By Wednesday, the restraining order had been granted. A formal civil protection notice now barred Karen and Marvin from approaching Tyler within 200 feet, including at his workplace. The store posted a photo of the two at every manager station, at the front desk, and in the break room. Police records were updated, and yet none of it felt final. Tyler didn't expect them to give up. Not because they were desperate, but because they hadn't gotten what they wanted, some kind of reaction, some public moment of collapse. And people like that, he now understood, didn't stop when they lost. They stopped when they believed they'd won. Friday night, 2 minutes before closing, an alarm went off in the back hallway. Not loud. Just a proximity alert. Someone had tripped the emergency sensor near the fire exit by the receiving doors. Tyler was shelving near the adjacent aisle when it happened. Jason was already on his radio. Security headed toward the camera room. Staff notified. Tyler stayed put. He didn't rush. He didn't react. He waited. Mike appeared 5 minutes later, walking fast but not panicked. Exit door was forced, he said. Didn't open all the way, just enough to trigger the system. Someone was outside. They're gone now. Footage showed a figure blurred by rain, partially obscured but tall, hunched near the door for less than 5 seconds before disappearing again. The grainy outline could have been anyone. But it wasn't just anyone. Tyler knew that posture. Later that night, while locking up, Jason found a small object resting at the base of the fire exit. It was a wooden charm, about the size of a coin. Burned into the wood was a single word, remember. Jason bagged it, filed the report, sent it to the local authorities. They're trying to rattle you, he said, but they've already lost. Tyler didn't speak. He looked down at the object, at the word. He wasn't afraid. Not anymore. There was a clarity in the act now, a visible desperation. They were trying to remind him of something, or maybe convince him that he was supposed to feel guilt. But Tyler had never owed them anything. Whatever story they had built in their heads, whatever ghost they thought they were chasing through his quiet posture or his careful steps, it wasn't him. He wasn't their memory. He wasn't their mistake. He was just the nearest silent body they could project their anger onto. But he was done being a screen for someone else's grief. The following week, Karen and Marvin were caught attempting to follow a different employee at a separate store. Charges were pressed. A judge reviewed the prior incidents, including Tyler's case, and ruled that both were unfit to continue contact with any staff across the retail chain. A multi-location restriction was issued. News of the ruling filtered back quietly. No headlines, no press. Just a memo. Tyler finished his shift that day like any other. No celebration, no announcement, just silence. But this time it was his, and it meant peace. Spring turned, slowly and without announcement, the way it always did in that part of the country, less a season than a shift in light and scent, a softening of air, a faint greening at the edges of parking lots and storefronts. Tyler noticed it not because he was looking for it, but because it simply began to appear around him. Customers wore lighter coats. The night shift break room started smelling like iced coffee instead of soup. Even the fluorescent lights, which had once seemed harsh and indifferent, began to feel tolerable again. Everything was returning to a rhythm, not the one that had existed before the Fosters appeared, but a new one, shaped by the sharp edges of what had happened and the quiet space that followed it. And Tyler, still moving at his own deliberate pace, adapted without complaint. He showed up. He worked. He didn't scan the parking lot the way he used to. He didn't check over his shoulder when shelving in quieter aisles. The pressure had lifted, not vanished, but loosened its grip. The restraining orders held. Legal followed through. Karen and Marvin were removed from every customer database tied to the company's loyalty and complaint systems. Their images remained posted at entrances for 2 months before being quietly filed away. None of the staff brought them up anymore. Most had gone back to laughing over shipments, complaining about schedules, texting during shift changes. Life resumed its shape, and Tyler never asked for recognition. He didn't want it. If anything, he preferred that the whole thing settle like silt in the bottom of a still pond there, but undisturbed. Jason, though, changed slightly. Not in a dramatic way. He still gave directions in clipped tones, still reminded staff to clock out on time, still filled out clipboard reports with the same pen he always used. But there was more attention in his tone when he spoke to Tyler now. Not pity, Jason wasn't capable of that, but respect. It came through in small gestures, a shift assignment in the quieter sections, a casual check-in during closing routines, a hand placed briefly on Tyler's shoulder once, without words, when a long shift ended. It wasn't about what had happened. It was about how Tyler had carried himself through it. People had noticed. Not loudly, not in ways that required acknowledgement. But they noticed. Dana noticed too. She never asked for details after the final night. She didn't want to relive it, and neither did he. Instead, she adjusted small things: her schedule, her parking habits, even the way she stocked the kitchen. One evening, after a long day, she walked into the apartment with 2 new sets of deadbolts and installed them without comment. Tyler helped, holding the drill while she worked in silence. It wasn't paranoia. It was protection. Quiet preparation. The kind that said, never again. Weeks later, while organizing inventory in the back room, Tyler was approached by a newer employee, a high school junior named Kyle, who had only recently started on night shift. Kyle was talkative, wide-eyed, still in that phase where every task felt like a performance. He liked to talk while working, even when no one responded. But that day, he paused. "You're the one from the complaint, right?" he asked suddenly. "With the weird couple?" The question wasn't malicious, just careless. Tyler didn't look up at first. He finished labeling the box in front of him, then finally turned, meeting Kyle's eyes. "Yeah," he said simply. "That was me." Kyle nodded slowly. "People say you never freaked out, that you stayed calm. I don't think I could have done that." Tyler didn't offer a lesson. He didn't tell him what it felt like, or how long it took to build that kind of restraint. He just said, "You don't have to react to everything. Sometimes silence is stronger." Kyle blinked, then shrugged and returned to work. The moment passed. Tyler liked that. The moment passed. By the end of the month, the store's routine was fully restored. New seasonal displays were up. Spring merchandise replaced the bulk clearance racks. Customers came and went, most of them never knowing that a few months earlier, the same space had been the setting for a series of quiet violations and unspoken tensions. No headlines had been written. No articles shared online. It was not a viral story, not a trending topic. It was just something that happened to someone who didn't invite it, who didn't cause it, and who didn't let it break him. The final shift of that week ended like any other. Tyler clocked out, packed his bag, and walked toward the employee exit. Dana was already outside, waiting in her car with the engine running and a podcast playing quietly through the open window. He got in, and they pulled away without exchanging more than a nod. The silence between them was familiar and warm, not the silence of fear or trauma, but the kind that came from understanding. They didn't need to speak to know the storm had passed. Tyler glanced out the window as they turned onto the main road. The parking lot faded behind them. No shadows lingered. No cars waited. Just night, calm and unthreatening. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel powerful. He just felt free. And that was enough.